Hello and welcome to A Gay Old Time. My name is Nigel May. You may know me from things I've presented on the TV. You may know me as a host from my radio shows, or you may have read one of my novels. You may not know me at all, and that's just fine. But anyone who does know me will know that I am very proud to be a gay man and hugely proud to be part of a beautiful queer community. This podcast is a celebration of that community, of its many beautiful people, people of all ages, people who have fought with their emotions and who have faced struggles and emerged victorious, who have had to tread their own path in life to live their real truth. People who inspire, who aspire, and who always entertain. People who matter. Each episode, I'll speak to a person from our LGBTQIA+ rainbow, discuss their journey and their thoughts on our rich and varied queer community. One person, one life, one conversation, and I can guarantee a gay old time. My guest today is John Partridge, one of the UK's busiest and most popular actors. As well as a star of stage and screen, he has also released his own music, acted as a telly judge, and starred in many a reality TV show, including his victory on Celebrity Masterchef and his turn on Celebrity Big Brother. On TV, he is best known for his portrayal of Christian Clarke in EastEnders, an openly homosexual character who was an inspiration to many. John was once named Entertainer of the Year at the Stonewall Awards, and he has toured theatrically in countless much-loved productions, including Cats, Cabaret, Folles, and Everybody's Talking About Jamie. John is openly gay. So now let's say, John Partridge, welcome to A Gay Old Time.
Hello, sir. How the devil are you?
All the better for hearing you, young man, as ever. Thanks for joining us on the podcast today. There is so much to talk about with you. Star of stage, screen, you've done so many iconic things throughout your career. And I'm going to say this right now, John Partridge, I think that here in the UK, you are one of our best loved actors.
Well, that is very, very kind of you to say. A jack of all trades and a master of none, as my mother always used to tell me, to keep my feet very, very firmly on the ground. But you know what? I think she was right. I have to say, I kind of do a lot of things, none of them very well.
I disagree. I think you're very good at everything you do. Let's go back to the beginning. I want to talk about little Johnny Partridge. There he is at an early age. Were there feelings of like queerness at that point in your life? I mean, now we see this fabulously confident gay man. Back then in the early days, you know, what was little Johnny Partridge like?
I always feel kind of guilty about the tag of being sort of a gay role model. I mean, I don't sort of suffer from it as much now, but when I first sort of had my first flush of profile, shall we say, obviously I was playing a gay character, and I was catapulted into that idea of somehow becoming a spokesperson or being this role model for the LGBT, as it was then, community. And I always kind of struggled with it because as a young person, as a very, very, very young gay person, and I mean sort of, you know, I knew about my gayness from 4, 5, 6, and although I come from a very, very working class background, you know, the classic 2 up, 2 down, houses back to back from Radcliffe, Manchester, you know, I would run up and down the ginnels and the yards of Radcliffe in my mum's dressing gowns and her shoes with makeshift crowns on my head, and nobody batted an eyelid. I didn't know that meant that I was queer or gay. I just knew that I liked to kiss little boys, and I did. I kissed Philip Bennett when I was 5 at his 5th birthday party, and I dared him. I said, I bet you don't dare. And he was the roughest boy in the school, Philip Bennett. He was the boy that people were frightened of. He was really rough. He would knock you out. He would punt. You know, he really was the typical little rough kid from a rough town. And I was at his birthday party and I dared him. See, I've always liked a bit of rough, you see. I dared him in his birthday party. I said, I bet you don't dare kiss a boy. And he was like, yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. And I was like, right. And I did. And I made him kiss me in his bedroom behind his door. And that was at 5. And I didn't know what it was. I just knew that I liked boys, and I was never afraid of it. I was never afraid to be gay or queer or different. And my family, even though they must have been very aware and very afraid of it, did not make me feel afraid of it either. Now, it wasn't necessarily spoken about. My father passed when I was young, but I do remember having a conversation with him when I was like 13, when we were playing snooker at the Con Club. And when I tried to explain that I was gay, he just kept telling me that I was theatrical. And that was his way of sort of, I know what you're saying, but I'm telling you that I'm going to call it theatrical. And I was kind of cool with that. But so I always kind of felt bad because I didn't have this sort of tortured coming out, as a lot of young gay people go through this excruciating deliverance of their gayness, of their gay selves. I just never had that. And it sort of left me with this weird shame about it, isn't it? Isn't it stupid? Most people carry the shame of being queer. I carry the shame of sort of it not being a big deal, not being a big deal for me. Being gay, I always say being gay, contrary to public belief, is not the first thing I think about myself. I know it's the first thing loads of other people think about me, but it comes very, very, very low down on my list. It always did, even when I was a kid. It wasn't the first thing I thought about me, and it still isn't. It's something that I like doing, obviously. Yes, I love men. I love everything about them. I love everything that it entails. But I love so many other things too. And I love so many other things about me too, not just my queerness, So that was something in my really, really long-winded answer to your very, very first question to me. That's what little gay Johnny was like. He was all of those things. He was dressing up. He was outrageously camp, not fazed by it, and certainly not scared of it, and certainly not scared of the implication of it either. Bearing in mind, this was the, mid-70s, I was born in 71, so I'm talking like 76, 77. So it wasn't like, it was still very much, your gay representation was, John Inman and, Lionel Blair, if you were lucky. There was so that's what it was. But I knew that that's what I was. I knew that I was a little John Inman.
Well, it sounds like little Johnny Partridge was a very happy child. I mean, were you theatrical at school? I mean, were you a good student to school, or were you a bit of a tearaway? Did you enjoy school? Was it an escape?
I was a good student at school till I left to go to the Royal Ballet School. Because, so I'm talking like till the age of 9, I was a good student. I was slightly disruptive because I get bored very quickly. I've always gotten bored very quickly. Even now when I'm working or I'm doing a show, the fun bit for me is the first 6 weeks. Once I've had the press night, I'm bored. I want to move on. I hate the repetition. I can't bear repetition, which makes it really, really difficult for somebody like me to sustain, to do a tour or a show, really after that press night, I'm like, right, what's next? I've done it now. So, but I was a good student until I realized that I wasn't going to need it. As soon as I got to the Royal Ballet School, so as soon as I got to 9 and I got to the Royal Ballet School and I could take a look around the room and realized pretty quickly that I could do it. Now, not necessarily ballet, but I realized pretty quickly what I had. And I knew that academia was not going to be it. So even when I went away to sort of vocational school, I was very disruptive in the classroom, but you put me in the studio. Once I put a pair of tights on and a pair of shoes, I was all in, full out, 110%. But sitting down in the classroom, because I knew, I was like, what do I need to do this for? Now, apart from like French, because all my teachers spoke French, and I went to the Paris Opera at a very young age for 2 years on an exchange program. So I knew that speaking French was good. I knew that speaking languages was good for classical ballet, Russian, French, Latin. I was down with all of that. But as far as like maths, history, geography. I was extremely, extremely disruptive. And unfortunately, that's why I was expelled from 4 schools. But that's another podcast.
Four schools. Wow, that is a whole nother story, isn't it? That's incredible. You naughty boy.
Yeah,
I love it.
Every school. But listen, but not from anything major. Like, I didn't start fires or anything. It was just for pushing boundaries. It was just pushing boundaries. It was just naughty things, but it wasn't anything major. But I say it wasn't anything major, but maybe it was. But as far as I was
spill
concerned,
the tea. What was it?
Well, there were all sorts of things. But I mean, the last time I got expelled from school, it's probably slightly controversial, and I was sort of having a relationship with my house master. And bearing in mind, I was young. So, and I was young. I was 14. Okay. So, you could look at that in many ways, now in today's culture.
Society, absolutely.
You could look at that in many ways. I don't look at it like that. Perhaps I should, but I don't. And really, it was kind of a cover-up. Really, it was kind of to shut the situation up and to kind of shut me up. But the thing is, it didn't bother me because I was, at that time I was fully participating in it. But I was 14, so you can make of that what you will.
But you didn't personally feel that it was abusive to you. You didn't feel that yourself.
No, I felt that I was, bearing in mind, 18 months later, I'm working in Cats in the West End, and I'm a fully paid up human being I'm a fully fledged adult working in a very adult environment. And to me, it's no different to that then. Bearing in mind, this was the mid 80s. It was a very different time. And I don't think I was the only one. I don't think that this story is particularly unique to me. But, you could look at it very differently now. And I'm sure people, listening to this might think of that very, very differently now. But, I wasn't scarred by it or feel that I was damaged by it in any way. It's just what it was. And I'm sure that many young queer people have, at that time of their lives, 14, 15, venture into relationships with people that are much older, especially in the mid 80s when there wasn't necessarily access to, social media or apps or ways of finding out where other queer people are or where they go. Most I was going to clubs in London at 14, as were lots of other queer people, and it wasn't, it was not strange and it was not unusual. So, I just put it in that category, really.
You and I grew up roughly around the same period. I know you're a few years younger than me, which shows from looking at your lovely face. But it's like, I used to go ballroom dancing when I was a kid, and I gave it up because of peer pressure and the fact that, on the way to ballroom dancing, I used to get bullied. There was like kids that used to be like, oh, you queer, you're doing that, it's puffy, throwing me in the local brook, all of that kind of stuff. You were doing ballet, possibly one of the most stereotypical, in inverted commas, queer things that a young person could do. Was there any bullying? Was there any kind of like people throwing names at you? Because it seems like, you were a very happy child. So was there other people saying, you can't do that? Little boys don't do that.
Well, I only started doing ballet when I went to the Royal Ballet School. So because my dad would not let me do ballet, I think for fear of that, I have an amazing sister. My sister is Fiona, is 7 years older than me. And, in those days, like I say, in the mid 70s, before I went away to boarding school at 9, we all played outside. We all played in the streets, and if there was a whiff, anything like that, my sister would come out and be on them like a ton of bricks. So I knew, where we lived and where we hung out and the kids in our street, I was very, very, very protected. Plus, with my sister being 7 years older, she had a group of friends that were much older. So, all the other kids knew if they messed with me, they'd have to deal with the older kids, of which my sister was the top of that tree, So I never worried about things like that. I did, however, get bullied when I went away to school. Really bullied, both physically, emotionally, because I was good. and other boys did not like that. And I was bullied ferociously, probably from the ages of like, not because I was queer per se, because I went to, because of the types of schools that I was at, but from sort of 11, maybe from like 11 to sort of 12 and a half, I was ferociously bullied. And then from being 12 and a half, that's when I really, really became what I would call, or what I used to call myself, a very, very militant queer person. Even then, at that age, at 12 and a half, that's when I was like, right, I am not putting up with this bullshit anymore. And then I really stepped into my gayness and I rubbed it in your face. And I used it as a way to shut the room down. And there was a precociousness to it, but it scared people. So I kind of became this sort of very, very punk, queer kid at school, and I would frighten the living daylights out of you with my queerness. But I wouldn't have done that had I not felt, had I not been backed into a corner, because that's kind of me. Sometimes I can have a tag of being maybe a bit prickly, but I will never bring anything to your door. I'm really not. I really won't. But if you keep poking, or if you bring something to me, but there is not a cat in house chance I'm going to allow you to diminish me like that. And in some ways, that's when I really turned a corner, because I knew once I went away to school, all my sort of support mechanisms fell away, in the sense that I really, not that I lost touch with my family and lost touch with myself, but I knew I had to I knew I was going to have to do it on my own. I went to a school at a time, like I say, I come from a very, very working class background. I do not come from money. I went to schools that were absolutely opulent. I had full scholarships to go to all these schools that I kept getting kicked out of. They were extremely grand, and all of the students, I would say 3 of us, came from money, and I don't mean a little money. I mean a lot. And I knew that I had to change. It sounds an awful word, but I knew that I was very different. And at that time, in the mid '80s, sort of regionalism was not a thing. There was no Terry Christian on the TV. There was no. I talked funny, I sounded funny, and I knew I had to change. And it was all around at that time that I sort of thought, okay, how am I going to navigate this? How am I going to do that? And so that's what I kind of did. And it all came at that same time. The bullying, me realizing that, okay, I come from a completely sort of social, economic, I'm different. What am I going to, and I'm also queer. What am I going to do? How am I going to kick out of that? And that was really sort of my reckoning. And that's when I sort of really, really worked out a lot of things.
Were you dating at that time as well? I mean, you were one of the platinum gays and never did the girl thing.
Definitely the girl thing. Always the girl thing. And even kind of quite late in my queerness, even though I was very, very queer, I always saw girls, but I always told them I was gay. So, there was never any whiff of me saying I'm bisexual, or I am definitely gay, but if we want to do this, I'll do it as long as you know that I'm queer. So, and I did that probably into my 20s.
Well, we're talking sex when you say if you want to do this. We're talking sex.
Yes, yeah. But I was always very straight up about it. I was always very straight up about saying I'm not bisexual. It's not that. We can have sex and we can have a relationship, but you need to know that I'm queer. So it was, I know, and I'm aware that sounds quite unusual, but it's not that I particularly enjoy, I love the company of women. I've always enjoyed the company of women. I love women, and having sex with women, I was something that I could do, but I knew I didn't fancy them, but I could still have sex with them.
Were you having sex with guys at the same time or not?
Absolutely having sex with them. Nothing was that serious. Nothing was, monogamy was not big on my list when I was a young person.
You mentioned earlier as well about coming out and not having to really have that coming out story that many young queer people do. It sounds like, and you mentioned about your father and his reaction, but your mother, I mean, I'm assuming she was happy all the way, and it was like, live your life, do what you need to do.
My mom was an extraordinary woman in the sense that my mother knew everything about me, but I don't think she really listened that hard. I think my mum loved me so much. Well, not that I think that she loved me so much. My mother loved me so much that there was nothing I could say to my mother that would make her feel any different. But by the same token, I don't think she ever fully took in what I was saying. So my mum always knew that I was gay because I'd told her 1,000 times. And then when I had my first serious boyfriend, I think I'd been in Cats for about a year, so I must have been about 17 and a half. And my dad had just passed away. And I'd met this guy in, what was that club in Mile End called? Benji's.
Oh.
Do you remember a club called Benji's in Mile End? Benji's. So it used to be on a Sunday night. Used to be on a Sunday night in London in Mile End. And my dad had died. And I'd gone to this club and I was I must have been 17. I hadn't turned 18 yet. And I was absolutely bladdered and I'd fallen off a bar stool. And this guy had picked me up and he'd taken me home. He got me home, put me to bed and left, and just left his name and a number on the side of the thing. And I called him the next day, and I was living in Finsbury Park then. He was living at a place in Manor House. And his name was Hubert, and he was a social worker, and he was 20, he was like 10 years older than me. So he must have been like 26, nearly 27. And a black guy. And he was so very, very different from at that point, from anybody in my world. He didn't drink, he didn't smoke, he didn't do drugs. He just loved to dance and go out. And he was huge. I mean, back then I was tiny. I was like some little wafy dancer, and he was massive. He was this great, big, smiling, as black as the darkest night. I used to say, he just was like my black. He was just like a prince, like that princely black. And I remember thinking, God, my mom's going to come down. She's got to meet him. My mom came down. I said, I've got somebody you've got to meet. And she bought me this washing machine. She bought me a washing machine. And she came into this washing machine and delivered it. And she come into the apartment. And I went into the door. And she was putting this stuff putting the plumbing in the washing machine, basically. And she thought he was obviously had come to plumb in the washing machine. And so he was plumbing the washing machine, and we sat in the thing, and then she'd gone out again. She gave him a £1 note. She took a £1 note out and she put it in his hand. She was like, thanks very much, like that. And he was like, I was like, oh, and then I was like, oh no, she thinks he's like from, she thinks she's his boyfriend. I was like, oh mum, this is like my boyfriend, Hugh. And she was like, she was like, sorry. And I was like, this is my boyfriend. This is Hugh. This is my boyfriend. And she kept just saying, sorry. And I was like, mum, I'm gay. You do know I'm gay, don't you? I was like, I'm gay. And she was like, and she didn't. The point being is she didn't know I was gay, or she was acting like she did. And this is what I mean. I think this was like the first time she'd actually registered what I actually meant. And I had many, many, many occasions with my mum like that. And this is what I mean. I think she just loved me so much that nothing I said ever sort of went in. It never really registered. But that being said, it wasn't a thing. And then it was gone. Even though I knew that she was kind of going, oh my God, what are we going to do? So in one way, it was a blessing, but in some ways, it meant that you had to keep repeating. You kept having these sort of situations where you thought, where you expected everything to sort of be understood, and it never really was. And I had that sort of boyfriend awkwardness 3 times. I've only had 3 major serious male relationships in my life, and one of those being the one that I've been in for the last 20 years. And I would have that again and again and again with her in a similar sort of way, where I'd say, okay, well, this is Hugh, or this is Hendrik, or this is Stephen, or this is Jonathan. And she'd be like, so you're doing that? And I'm like, yeah. This is it. This is what I do, So I don't know what that was. I really, really don't know what that was, but that was the truth of it.
But the plus side of that is that she was obviously accepting, even if maybe she wasn't that demonstrative about it.
She was accepting, but it always kind of made me... See, the funny thing about it is when my mum was very, very ill, when my mum was really, really ill and we'd moved her out of her home...
Because your mum had Alzheimer's, didn't she, bless her?
My mum had Alzheimer's and she lived with us for a very, very long time. And then when we couldn't do it anymore, and that's the reason why I left EastEnders and all of that sort of stuff, because I just couldn't be going out of the house at that time in the morning and coming home at night. I just couldn't do it. But when we've moved her out of of our home and put her into a care home, I'd gone and I'd seen her, and I'd gone with John, who is my, as you know, my husband. She'd forgotten who John was, and I said to her, I was like, well, John's my husband, John, my husband. And we had this horrible, and I hate thinking about it because she told me that I wasn't gay and that, and that it was disgusting, and that I was disgusting and that I would burn in the eternal flame. It was rough. It was really rough because she'd never, ever said anything like that. And in some ways, it made me think, is that why? Is that what she really thought? Did she really think that it was disgusting, and that I was disgusting? And was that her way of dealing with it, just pretending that it wasn't true or that she was blocking it? I don't know. I've talked about this with my sister so many times, and she was like, of course it's not, but I don't know. It was so visceral and so unbelievably cruel and hurtful. And and it's something that I'd never experienced from my family at all. And it was awful. It was horrible.
You can hear it in your voice, John. Let's talk about something happier. Let's talk about you at the age of 16, moving into the West End in Cats, Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cats. It gets no bigger. I mean, that really is. I mean, when I think of you, Johnny Partridge, that's the first thing that I think of, you in Cats, because it's become synonymous with John Partridge. That must have been a moment for a little gay boy of 16 to be in the West End, dancing on stage with all of these fantastic people in a fantastic production. And I dare say, having a fantastic time.
It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. But I didn't know it at the time, because at the time, I just thought, well, this is it, isn't it? This is what I'm going to do. You don't have the nerve. You don't have the fear, especially when you're that young. I mean, I was 15 when I was auditioning for it. And I remember turning up to the Blackpool Opera House. I was 15 and I was number 537. I was number 537 to walk into the doors, because those days, that's the amount of people that would turn up to an open call. There would be thousands of people. And I remember walking into that audition room and looking at those hundreds of people on the stage. And I was like, I have got this. I am gonna smash this. And I walked onto that stage and I just knew. I could look around the room and I knew I could do it. Because I had trained since 9 years old. I went to the Royal Ballet School at 9. I went to the Paris Opera at 12. I was at the Northern Ballet at 14. I danced on the Opera House at the Colosseum. I'd done major ballets. I'd taken every classical exam that you could take. And I was ready to walk. That was my time. And I was like, I'm going to walk onto this stage and I am going to not even break a sweat. And I did. I walked onto that stage and it wasn't even difficult for me. It was not even hard work. I was like, it makes me, it's so easy to be inspired, isn't it, by a piece of music or by watching a film or, going to see a show. It is so, so hard to self-inspire. It just is. To have that sort of belief, to have that, and in those days, at that time, I had that kind of absolute self-belief. And when I have dark days, I definitely go into myself and I pull that out of myself. If I'm really nervous before a performance, or if I'm not really rehearsed enough, or I've got something really major coming up that I want, that is what I do. I go back inside myself and I pull that boy out of me. Not that I took it for granted. I didn't, but I knew that I put the work in. I'd been training all my life for this, and I was going to go on that stage and I was going to get it. And I did. because I was ready. I was that determined and I was that ready, and I knew it. And it's, it's like anything, isn't it? It's like, it's like the magic of Christmas. If you can only hang on to it, if you can only hang on to, to those moments. But in some ways you can, you can, we lose the ability to do that as we age and as life kicks the crap out of us, but if you can hang on, and also if you're lucky enough to have had that, if you're lucky enough to have had those moments, and that sort of self-belief and determination I had as a kid, is something that I am always grateful for. And it's what got me there. It's what catapulted me. But I wasn't on my own. There were a couple of us at that time. There were a couple of young people at that time that were hoofing around. So it wasn't like, once again, it wasn't necessarily that it was unique to me. It was a different time. It was a different schooling system. You had different opportunities then as young people. I think it's really, really hard as a young person now to even know what you want to do. I'm lucky. I always knew what I wanted to do. I knew I was going to dance. I knew that's what I wanted to be. And I put my heart and soul into it, rightly and wrongly, to get to that point. The trouble is, the trouble starts once you get something at that age that you've dreamed all your life for, and you're that young, and you go, okay, well, now I've done it. So now what? Now what do I do? I dreamed of being in Cats at that point, and then you're 16 and you've done it. Then what do you do? That's when you got to sort of, finding a new dream is not so easy. It's not so easy.
That self-confidence at 16 was like your superpower. When was the sort of like crash and burn as far as the confidence was concerned?
My dad passed away when I was sort of 17, it's about 17 and a half, 18. And I know this now as I've gone back and had other experiences in my life, and I've gone back and looked at it. I mean, at the time I didn't put the two and two together, but my dad was the reason that I danced. My dad was 51 when I was born. And that sounds like nothing now, but then in the 70s it was, he was much older than the other dads. And, so of a Saturday and a Sunday afternoon, we weren't going to be kicking a football around the back garden, not that I wanted to, mind. But what he did, do for me, and more importantly with me, was he would sit me down, we would watch the MGMs, we'd watch the Dancing Men, the Singing in the Rains, the On the Towns. At 5, I had no idea who Kevin Keegan was, but as soon as Sid Charisse sashayed across the screen, I knew exactly who she was. And it was my dad that was responsible for me, for my love of everything musical. And he was the person that really set me off on this trajectory, even though he had reservation about it. And even though my dad never saw me dance, the only time my dad ever saw me dance was when I went into Cats, and then he passed away straight after that. So that was the only time. He never saw me perform. He never came and saw me perform. I don't know why that was. And it wasn't that he didn't support me. It just wasn't that way. He just wasn't that way. But he did see me when I finally got onto that stage. And I know that they had this big, massive, huge party, and we were sat on my opening night in Cats, and we were sat around a table. We sat at this big table in the Winter Gardens in Blackpool, massive table. And this guy turned around to my dad, and he was, obviously he was an investor in the show, an angel in the show. And he turned around to my dad and he said, "Have you got any money in the show?" And my dad was like, "You what?" And he was like, "Are you an angel? Are you an investor in the show?" And my dad was like, "What's an angel?" And so he explained to me and said, "Well, it means, I'm an investor in the show. I've got money in the show." And my dad was like, "Oh, yeah, I'm an angel. I'm an angel in this show." And he was like, "Oh, you ready?" He said, "Because," and then he just looked at me and he said, "Because I've invested in him. I invested in him." And then my dad took my hand and we went onto the ballroom floor at the Winter Gardens, and my dad waltzed around that floor with me. in that winter garden. I will never, ever forget that. And then he passed away 6 months after that. I think that's kind of so my dad passing away, I couldn't cry at the funeral. I didn't cry at the funeral. I didn't even really feel it. My life didn't change. I thought my life didn't change. I never really saw him anyway. I'd been away at boarding school all this time. I wasn't very close to him. It wasn't a huggy, close, warm, lovey relationship. And I thought, well, so he's gone. Or so I thought. But really, that's when that little sort of fire in me, it did dim. Bearing in mind, it was also as well, then I'm 18, then I'm really stepping into myself. Then I'm sort of like experimenting a lot with life, with drugs, I'm also living on my own, in the late 80s in London. There's an awful lot of distraction. There's an awful lot of things going on. We're on the back end of, of icebergs and AIDS and clubs, the birth of ecstasy, summer of love. I mean, there was a lot going on, and I fully embraced that side of my life. I fully embraced the dangerous side of my life, really. I was squatting. I was working in the West End, but I was living in a squat. I'm calling it a squat. I think other people might call it a crack house or something else like that. But I was working and going to work every day. But when you're young and that age, you sort of have these strange resiliences to what's around you. But that's when I started pushing those types of buttons and those types of boundaries. And then I became kind of absent to my family. And I'm ashamed to say I went for about 7 years without speaking to them. Not because we'd had any sort of row, not because there was any sort of problem, just because I was too busy. That's the only way I can sort of describe it. But I was working and I was bouncing from show to show to show to show. I think through that time, through my sort of like, from the period of like sort of 16 through to 26, I think I did like 12 West End shows back to back. So it wasn't that I was sort of, I always turned up to work. I think I've probably only missed about 20 performances in my entire career. I mean, that's just always the way I've been. Something flipped in me, something changed in me. I knew that I was good. And I could kind of not phone it in, but I stopped going to class. I stopped sort of focusing on the discipline of dance and the discipline of of my craft. And I sort of got away with it for a long time. And I did things that probably weren't that great in hindsight, but I'm lucky. I'm one of the very, 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 very lucky ones that lived to tell the tale, because lots of my friends did not. We're talking AIDS, we're talking HIV, we're talking death from ODing. This is, I'm talking from the periods of like 88 through to 94, 95. A lot of my friends died. A lot of all our friends died in that time, especially in the West End, a lot of them. And I, by the grace of God, skirted around it because I was a young fool. And I acted like a fool. Now, don't get me wrong, it wasn't all doom and gloom. I had a bloody amazing time and did some amazing things. It wasn't all awful. It was amazing, but when I really think, there are instances within that, when I think about it now, people would never believe it. And the funny thing is, like now, when I look at the kids now, so been doing a musical right now called Everybody's Talking About Jamie, as you know. And the kids, when I look at some of these kids on the show, like some of these kids are 18, 19, 20, and if I told them some of the things that we were doing, when we were, they'd be horrified, because the kids these days, they're just not that way. They are really not that way. Thank God they seem to have it really kind of worked out. No, but they're kind of driven. They're driven in a way that we weren't, or that I wasn't. They're very much aware of, they don't drink, they're not doing drugs, they're not smoking, they're not, I still smoke because I think it's cool. I mean, how pathetic is that? I'm 53 and I'm still like, still like to have a cheeky cigarette. It's outrageous. They would never do that now. The kids that you work with now, they are just not like that. If they knew the things that we got up to, they would be appalled.
Do you think then, John, that this is why maybe you struggle with the role model tag? Because to me, those kids in Jamie, or, all of the fabulous productions that you've done over the years, Cats, Cabaret, all of them, Le Cage Folles, people must look up to you because you're successful, you're brilliant at what you do, you're a powerhouse vocalist, they see you on TV, you 1 minute you're a judge on a reality show, and the next you're, Christian Clarke in EastEnders. You are ticking the role model box, even if you feel that you're not being a role model. So do you think it's because of that self-doubt that you have in yourself, maybe from certain periods in your life and the things that went on around you, that has made you feel, I don't know, almost not worthy to be a role model?
I am proud of my longevity, Nigel. I think, longevity, doing what we do, work, being in the arts, is what I am proud of. And if I don't mind being looked as a role model for that. The fact that, I'm going into my 39th year now doing this, working like this, working at this level. I don't mind being a role model for that, about how you sort of navigate the industry, navigate being, in 1 year. I am a tenacious queen. I understand what perseverance is. And I do believe that the discipline that I had from my youth is what keeps me here. The role model bit about the sort of lifestyle, and that's when I struggled. Even now, I still make enormous mistakes. I don't have the answers to any of that. I only have I know what I know. And I guess sometimes I know too much of that. And sometimes I'm embarrassed by that as well. I think a lot of queer people of my age sort of do carry some sort of shame, some sort of survival shame, some sort of things like, well, I did all of these things. And some, and I'm still, do you know what I mean? And I'm only working this out really as I'm talking to you right now, because it's not sort of a question I sit and ask myself very much, why do I feel uncomfortable about being a sort of role model for queer people? But I think there is an element of that, the fact that I've managed to, because that's what it is, it's luck, why have I sort of, how have I? Why have I? Am I living up to that then? Am I achieving all of the things that I should be achieving when I've given a pass? When I've been allowed to, am I doing the right things? Am I making the right choices? Am I being the best version of me, the best person, the best husband, the best friend, the best? And I think I do have a little bit of that. And I think my way to combat it, or the way to push it away, is to not acknowledge myself in that way.
I believe everything happens for a reason, John, and maybe one of the many reasons that you are still here and still doing your fabulous thing is you became part of gay history when you signed up to give us Christian Clarke on EastEnders. Because, as you mentioned, when we were growing up, it was Mr. Humphries on TV, or you would see Larry Grayson, and that was kind of the stereotype or the sort of benchmark for, potential queerness, because nothing was really said. Christian Clarke, EastEnders, this fabulous character, and you were the person portraying that character. You have become gay history. How did you find that? Was there a pressure that you put on yourself playing that character, or was it a joy to play? And was it a challenge of like, okay, I've got this gay character, hoorah, let's get to it? Or was there trepidation?
There was pressure in the sense that they kept saying to me that they wanted a real depiction of a gay person. This is what they kept saying. Yeah, when I went into the show, that wasn't what they were showing. That wasn't how they were dressing me. That wasn't how they were writing for me. Now, bearing in mind, I hadn't done any sort of continual drama at that point. I didn't really know how it worked. It takes a while for you to sort of like understand what is going on here. But then I very quickly realized that, I'm being written for. The people who are writing this are, the majority of them are 50-year-old white straight men who've got no idea of what a real, in inverted commas, gay person is. And even, what is that anyway? They kept saying, well, we don't want it to be a stereotype. And I was like, I said, explain to me this word stereotype. said, explain to me what you mean by that. Well, we don't want it. I said, you don't want somebody to be typically gay, do you? I said, but that's the T, isn't it? That's the T. What you want is someone to be gay, but not too gay. And that's the thing that used to really wind me up. And that, you know what I mean? Because then you get away with it by saying, we don't want somebody who's like, you know, I am many shades of gay. Some days I'm real butch gay. Some days I'm like around the house in my Marabou slippers, listening to show tunes and Barbra Streisand. Other time I would, you know, there are, you know, as a gay person, I flip from one side to the other. You know, sometimes I'm going to be top, sometimes I'm going to be bottom, sometimes I'm going to be both, sometimes I'm going to be, you know, and that type of attitude, that type of idea of what queer is, it really, really pisses me off. So I didn't want to swear on your podcast, but that really, really wound me up, and it still winds me up. So I very quickly worked out all of that. I was like, okay, that's what this is, and I know now what this is. So I made it my business to change him up. So I thought, right, I'm going to step into the size of my body. I'm going to change the way I dress. And then there was one day, and I would paraphrase certain things. And then there was one day and they said, we need you to go into this booth. And like, there was one line they'd given to me about going to a discotheque or something. I said, who the shit says discotheque? And so I changed the line to something like, you know, I've been in a sweatbox in Vauxhall all night or something like that. And they went, oh, you can't say that. I said, what? Can't say what? What's sweatbox? What does it mean? I went, it means I've been in a sweatbox. What do you think it means? Well, I don't know. Has it got some like, do you mean you've been in it? I said, so they thought, so when I would say all these things, they were like, well, that's just filth. It's horrible. I was like, I'm not saying it's not filth. I'm not saying. So then they made me go into a booth and like put all these words down and then give them the meanings, the definitions of what these words meant so that they could check.
So true. Can I ask about a role that you had in more recent times, Julius Caesar in, of course, Queen Cleopatra? You know, Julius Caesar, possibly one of the straightest people on earth, but there you were, a beautiful actor who happens to be queer, playing it beautifully. Did you get any comeback for that at all?
But listen, here's the tea with that. So I went in for the casting, and the director, Tina Gravi, amazing, BAFTA winning. She had no idea who I was. I turn up on the set on the first day, and Tina goes to me, you know, nobody wanted you but me. And I was like, I'm just about to shoot my first nude scenes. And I was like, and she was like, yeah, she said, you know, you went out of the room, and I was like, oh my God, that's Caesar. And they were like, you don't want him. That's like, you know, he's like John Partridge, like some puff off the TV. Like, he's a queer actor. He's not going to be able to play that part. And she was like, well, I'll tell you what then, you send your first choice to America and I will send my first choice to America, and we'll see what Jada Pinkett Smith thinks about it. And that's what they did. They sent my tape off and they sent her tape off, and she was like, holy hell, we want hot Caesar. That's who it is. But that was the truth of that because these were British Tina didn't know. These were two British producers. They were like, he is a gay actor. This is the other thing. When I first went into EastEnders, without my permission or the first thing that came out in the Sun, gay actor John Partridge, 36. Now, I never gave anybody carte blanche to say anything about me, to say anything about who I am, whether I'm in, whether I'm out, whether I'm gay, whether I'm straight, whether I'm nothing. And at the time, I kind of didn't, once again, because I was kind of new to it, it didn't really bother me. But you would never write that about somebody else. Straight actor Hugh Grant. You don't say straight, not that I'm putting myself in the same bracket as Hugh Grant, but for one, that's the first person that came to my head. You just don't. Yeah, I was gay actor John Partridge. So, but the thing, what I'm trying to say about that is that type of thing sticks. It does stick. It presents you, for me, coming into people's consciousness as an actor, I was always then, from then on in, gay actor John Partridge. So when you come to do other things, or you come to move, so this produced. Now, obviously, everybody knows I am a gay actor, and so it's kind of doesn't work, but it does in the sense that they were like, oh no, he's gay actor John Partridge. Nobody is going to believe that he can be. And I think that's outrageous. But that's, as a queer actor, that is what you have to. Those are those are the hurdles that you have to kick down. And you can't, and it takes somebody else like Tina, thank God, to go, I don't know what you're talking about and I don't care because I don't know who he is. And I'm sure Jada Pinkett Smith is not going to know that he is gay actor John Partridge that played one queer role on TV. So then I had to do my first scenes, my first sex scenes. That's because you always start with the sex scenes, don't you? And after I came off set on that first day, it was a really long day on my first day. They did have the grace to come down to me and say, John, Tina's told us, she told you what we'd said, and we just want to come down and A, apologize, B, we've just watched your rushes and it's amazing. You look like a movie star. And we're really, really sorry that we spoke like that. And I hope you can take that as it's meant. And I hope that you can accept that we were wrong. And I was like, I'm here. I'm in the costume. Do you know what I mean? I've just had my cock out. I'm like in Morocco. I'm good. Yeah, I'm all good. But that is also part of that as well. And as a queer, these are the things that you have to deal with as a queer actor. If you choose to, and not that I really chose it, if you're out, and this is what I meant about that, I never chose for them to out me in that way professionally. They could have just written John Partridge actor. Yeah, I'm sure people would have worked it out pretty quick, but that was not my choice. It was not my choice to be outed in the sun in that way. People always ask me, how far do you think we've come, and how far do you think we've come in general with sort of gay rights and equal I don't think we've come any way at all. Nigel, in fact, I think we go backwards. I think we take, as the great Paula Abdul says, 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, my love. As the great Paula Abdul says.
Queen Paula of Abdul. That leads me on to a little fun section that I like to do on this podcast, because you mentioned Paula Abdul, so let's go down the song route straight away. What is the song that is guaranteed to get John Partridge on the dance floor?
Oh, God, there are so many, but I guess one that is literally guaranteed to get me on the dance floor would probably be, I go way, way back, so it would probably be CeCe Peniston, Finally.
Tune. That's a great tune.
Mr. Right. I mean, it's a great tune, and it reminds me of 1990, sort of 92, where I was fully in that moment, that fully early 90s movement, the sort of post Summer of Love, the sort of post acid house. And that reminds me of going to clubs like Bang up on Tottenham Court Road. Yeah, so I would say that something like CeCe Peniston's Finally would be guaranteed to get me on the floor.
That is a great tune. What's the best experience you've ever had in an LGBTQ plus safe space?
Clubbing in the 80s and the 90s was an amazing, in the sense that gay spaces, I think straight people suddenly realized what gay spaces were. You suddenly, and I think drugs were a lot to do with it. The sort of explosion of ecstasy sort of allowed straight men to sort of come into gay spaces and not feel the pressure of that. And there was, and I think what also that did was it brought sort of heterosexuals and homosexuals together in a way that, and I know it's an awful thing to say that drugs did that, but without that sort of drug, I think it bridged a lot of gaps. I think it gave birth to a real sort of level of understanding that you hadn't sort of had post sort of AIDS and the post like the gay plague, gays are evil, gays are hideous, we should put all the gays on an island and get rid of them. I think it brought people together in gay spaces. So when I think about Heaven and Bang, clubs like Crash and Trade, so I know they weren't necessarily predominantly LGBTQ places. Like I know Trade wasn't really, but it was when sort of like gay spaces really opened their doors to straight people. And that period of my life, that sort of like early 90s, so I'd say like sort of like 90 through to 94, that period, in those types of clubs, in those types of spaces, it was a joyous thing. And yes, we went out every weekend, but it wasn't that we just went out every weekend to get high. It's that we went out every weekend to have that sense of community, to have that sense of, it was freeing and it was inclusive, and you could really be whoever you wanted to be. You could meet the most amazing people. I've got lifelong friends from that time in my life, from going to those clubs, from going to Bang, from going to Trade, from going to Heaven at that time. People that I still see now, people that, you know, are very, very much in my inner circle. And it really was. And I don't know, you know, I don't club like that anymore. And I don't know whether that's even a thing anymore, that type of real inclusion. And it was diverse, and there were all sorts of people there. You know, there were all denominations, trans, straight, you know, and it was not a thing. I mean, now we're all so boxed up and all so, even within us, you know, all this nonsense of LGB without the T and all. I mean, I despair. I sometimes I really do. I despair about all of that, and I have no idea how that started. I just don't understand how a community like ours can exclude anybody. I just don't, and it makes me so angry, because it just feels ignorant. And I was like, when did queer people get ignorant? God, out of everybody, you know, we know more than anybody the horrors of the lack of community, the horror of being isolated, the horror of shame, the horror, you know, and yet we seem to be in a place right now where we're kind of all about that. And I don't know about that. At that time, then it was not like that. It was a joyful, joyful thing. And it's where I grew, and it's where I learned, and it's where I really developed emotionally and socially.
Happy times indeed. Right, final question, Mr. Partridge. You are putting on a dinner party, and you are able to have your 5 perfect dinner party guests. They can be LGBTQ or otherwise. They can be living. They can be dead. Make them famous so we know who they are. Who would you pick and why?
So my top dinner party guest would be Robert Downey Jr. I just adore everything he's done. I love everything that he's done on screen. I love the fact that he has had a absolutely coloured life. He seems to have come on the other side of adversity. He seems to just be an absolutely crazy mother. And I think it would just be great fun. My next guest would be Rudolf Nureyev. He was an absolute inspiration to me as a young queer dancer. I watched his videos endlessly of Le Bayadère. I did Le Bayadère for an examination of mine called the Solo Seal, which is an exam that's the top RAD ballet exam that you can possibly take. And I watched endless videos of him. My next guest would be, I'm going to do somebody living who I adore and don't see enough of, and that would be Boy George, who I worked with on the musical Taboo, who I also think is somebody that has managed to have longevity and sustain and continues to develop and grow and push boundaries and be self-reliant and self-inspiring and self-sufficient. And that is something that I really, really admire. And just for messiness, the 4th person that I'd like to have on there is Marilyn, who is somebody that I have played and somebody who I follow on social media and also really admire. But to be fair, I just want to see George and Marilyn on the same table and to see the disgrace of how that I think it would just be an absolute horror show. But Marilyn, I love you too. I mean, you are, if you listen to this podcast, you are a huge inspiration to me also. And my 5th, And final, it would probably be my mum, because, you know, I am a mummy's boy. I know that my mum would sit on that table and have no idea what was going on or what it was but, you know, on a serious note, I'd give anything to have one more day with my mum, just one more day. And that would be a lovely thing.
That's it for this episode of A Gay Old Time. Thank you so much for listening, and I really hope you enjoyed the conversation with John as much as I did. I love the fact he was so candid. Really appreciate that. If you would like to experience more rainbow joy, then please subscribe and follow the podcast on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you're listening to me right now, and do share it to anyone else you think would love to listen in as well. Thanks a million as ever to Juliet at Pineapple Audio Production for making everything so gorgeous and sparkly with the podcast. I will be back soon with another episode featuring a deep and meaningful with another inspirational individual. Until then, from me, Nigel May, sending all the love and hoping that whatever you're up to, if it applies to you, you're having a gay old time. Enjoy.